churches are places meant to inspire peace, comfort, and reflection, but their age-old walls often hold secrets far older than we could imagine. When the sun sets, and the stillness of night falls, the sanctity of these spaces sometimes takes on a much darker, chilling tone. Whether it's mysterious whispers, shadowy figures, or inexplicable phenomena, the line between the spiritual and the supernatural blurs. The stories you're about to hear explore eerie encounters within the walls of seemingly holy places. These aren't tales of divine miracles, but rather of unsettling events that defy explanation. Make sure your surroundings are quiet, and the lights are on. You might never see churches the same way again. Happening number 1, the choir's echo. It happened a few years ago when I was traveling through a small town. I stumbled upon a beautiful, centuries-old church tucked between narrow cobblestone streets. Its tall steeple and stained glass windows seemed to call for a visit, so I stepped inside. The interior was breathtaking, rows of wooden pews, a grand organ, and intricate carvings on the walls. The air smelled faintly of incense, and the silence was comforting, almost sacred. No one else was there, but a sign by the door indicated the church was open for visitors. As I wandered toward the altar, I began to hear faint singing. It sounded like a choir, melodic, harmonious, and hauntingly beautiful. The voices seemed to come from above, as if a hidden choir was performing in the rafters. I froze, listening. The singing was captivating, yet unsettling because I knew I was alone in the building. Curious, I climbed the narrow staircase leading to the choir loft. It creaked under my weight, and with each step, the singing grew louder. By the time I reached the top, the voices were so clear I could distinguish each harmony. But the loft was empty. I stood there, heart pounding, as the singing continued around me, echoing through the church. The sound was all-encompassing, as if the air itself carried the melody. I leaned over the railing to look below, but the pews were still empty. Suddenly, the organ played a single, deep note that reverberated through the church. The singing stopped. I bolted down the stairs, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have in the silence. When I reached the entrance, I turned for one last look. That's when I saw it, a faint figure near the altar, dressed in what looked like a choir robe. The figure raised a hand, and the organ played another note, deep and resonant. Without waiting to see more, I pushed open the heavy doors and ran into the daylight. Later, I learned from a local that the church was rumored to be haunted by a choir that had perished in a fire centuries ago. Their music, some say, still echoes through the halls, searching for a congregation that no longer exists. Since that day, I've avoided old churches, especially when they're empty. Some voices are best left unheard. Happening number 2, the locked room. This took place during a visit to a remote countryside village. A friend and I had decided to explore an abandoned church we had heard about, a small stone building that had been left to decay for decades. Local stories claimed it was haunted, but we shrugged it off as folklore. When we arrived, the church was exactly how I'd imagined it. Its walls were crumbling, and vines snaked up the sides. The wooden doors creaked as we pushed them open, revealing a dim interior coated in dust and cobwebs. Inside, the air was heavy, and the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic. Rows of decaying pews faced an altar that was draped in torn cloth. To the left, a small door caught our attention. Curious, we tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It felt strange, there was no lock, but the door felt unnaturally heavy. We gave up after a few tries and continued exploring the main hall. As we wandered, we began to hear faint sounds. At first, it was a light tapping, as though something was knocking on the floor beneath us. Then came whispers, soft, indistinct, but undeniably there. I glanced at my friend, and her wide eyes told me she heard it too. The noises seemed to grow louder the closer we got to the locked door. By the time we stood in front of it again, the whispers had turned into muffled cries. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the wood. "Help us." The voice was faint but clear. My blood ran cold. We scrambled to leave, but as we turned, the door creaked open behind us. slowly, almost as if it were inviting us in. The room beyond was pitch black, and the cries stopped instantly. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I shined my flashlight inside. The beam illuminated a small, empty room with stone walls. Nothing unusual until I noticed deep scratch marks covering the walls, as though someone had been clawing to get out. Suddenly, my friend screamed. I spun around to see her pointing at the door. It had slammed shut, trapping us inside the main hall. We banged on it, but it wouldn't open. Then we heard it, a low growl, followed by heavy footsteps approaching the locked room. I don't remember how we got out. One moment we were pounding on the door, and the next we were outside, gasping for air under the afternoon sun. The church was silent behind us, its doors now firmly shut. Later, we learned that the church had once been used as a prison for accused witches during the 1600s. The locked room? It was where they had been kept before their execution. I'll never forget the voices I heard that day or the feeling of being watched as we fled. Some places hold on to their past, refusing to let go, and this church is one of them. Happening number 3, Shadows in the Sanctuary. 3 summers ago, I visited a historical church in a small European village during a backpacking trip. The church was known for its Gothic architecture and centuries-old artwork. Tourists frequented it during the day, but I arrived late in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The caretaker was kind enough to let me in, saying I could stay for a short while before he locked up for the night. The moment I stepped inside, the vast, echoing silence of the sanctuary enveloped me. The dim light filtering through the stained glass windows gave the place an ethereal, almost eerie quality. I wandered the nave, marveling at the towering arches and intricate carvings. The only sound was the creak of the wooden floor beneath my footsteps. But as I approached the altar, I began to hear faint whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the acoustics playing tricks on me. But the whispers grew louder and more distinct. It was as if a group of people were murmuring prayers or chanting, but I couldn't make out the words. I turned, expecting to see the caretaker, but the church was empty. Feeling uneasy, I decided to head back toward the entrance. That's when I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. Near one of the confessionals, a shadow moved. It wasn't the flicker of candlelight or the shifting light from the windows, this shadow had form and intent. It slid across the floor and disappeared into the confessional booth. I stood frozen, heart racing. Gathering my courage, I approached the booth. The door creaked slightly as I reached for the handle, and the whispers grew louder. My hand hovered for a moment before I pulled it open. The booth was empty. A sudden chill ran through me, and the whispers ceased as abruptly as they had started. I stepped back, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. That's when I noticed something even more unnerving. On the wooden floor of the confessional, faint but clear, were 2 fresh footprints, as if someone had just been standing there. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was outside. The caretaker was waiting by the doors, a puzzled look on his face. When I told him what I'd experienced, his expression darkened. He explained that the confessional I had seen was no longer used, as it was believed to be cursed. Decades ago, a priest had passed away while hearing confessions in that very booth. Since then, visitors and caretakers alike had reported strange occurrences, whispers, shadows, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. I never went back to that church, and to this day, the memory of those whispers and the shadowy figure lingers. Some places, it seems, hold on to the echoes of the past, refusing to let them fade. Happening number 4, the candle that wouldn't go out. A few years ago, I attended a wedding in a historic church located in the middle of nowhere. The church was centuries old, with an atmosphere that carried the weight of time. It was said to have survived fires, wars, and even a plague, and its walls seemed to whisper stories of the past. The ceremony went smoothly, but during the reception, a few of us decided to explore the church again. It was late at night, and the dim glow of the candles inside created long, eerie shadows on the walls. As we walked down the aisles, my friend pointed out an alcove that held a single, lit candle. It stood out because all the other candles were either burned out or unlit. Curious, one of my friends tried to blow it out. But no matter how hard he tried, the flame wouldn't even flicker. We laughed nervously, thinking it must be some kind of trick candle. Then the air around us grew cold, unnaturally so. It was the middle of summer, and yet we could see our breath forming in front of us. Before we could react, the candle's flame suddenly grew brighter, illuminating the alcove in a harsh, golden light. That's when we saw it, a figure standing just behind the candle, barely visible in the glow. It wasn't solid, more like a shadow given shape. None of us could move, frozen by the sight of it. The figure raised an arm slowly, as if pointing to something behind us. Terrified, we turned around and saw nothing but the empty pews. When we looked back, the candle was out, and the figure was gone. We bolted out of the church, our laughter replaced by panicked breaths. Later, one of the locals told us a chilling story about that alcove. It was once used to hold vigil candles for priests who had passed away. But one priest, accused of dark practices, had been buried without proper rites. Legend says his spirit lingers, refusing to let his candle burn out. I haven't stepped foot in that church since, and I never look at candlelight the same way again. Some flames, it seems, aren't meant to be extinguished. Churches, for many, are sanctuaries of faith and solace, but these stories remind us that even the most sacred places can carry shadows of the unknown. Whether it's lingering spirits or unexplained phenomena, some encounters leave us questioning what lies just beyond our understanding. Thank you for listening to these chilling accounts. If you have a story of your own, whether it happened in a church, at home, or anywhere else, feel free to share it. You never know who might relate, or who might finally find an answer to their own unsettling experience. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, the most unexpected places can hide the darkest secrets.